The conference room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and printer ink. 20 people sat around the long glass table, laptops open, notebooks ready. It was supposed to be a normal Monday meeting. My manager stood near the screen with a folder in his hand. He didn't look at me. "Before we begin," he said, clearing his throat, "there's a serious matter we need to address." The room went quiet. Then he said my name. A few people shifted in their chairs. Someone stopped typing. My manager opened the folder slowly. "We've uncovered evidence of misconduct." The word hung in the air like a stain. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself, because the moment he said it, I already understood something. This wasn't a mistake. It was a setup. What I didn't know yet was how fast their plan would collapse. The first thing I noticed was how carefully everyone avoided my eyes. The conference room lights were too bright, reflecting off the polished table and making every expression easier to read. A few coworkers stared down at their keyboards. Others suddenly found their coffee cups fascinating. My manager, Daniel, stood at the front with the same calm posture he used during quarterly presentations, except this time he wasn't presenting sales numbers. He was presenting me. "Over the past several weeks," he said, "there have been irregularities connected to several internal files." He clicked the remote. A spreadsheet appeared on the screen behind him. My name was highlighted in red. Have you ever watched your reputation collapse in slow motion? Because that's exactly what it felt like. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet pieces of trust falling apart one by one. Daniel kept speaking. "These files were accessed outside normal hours," he continued. "Several confidential documents were also transferred externally." A few people shifted in their seats. Someone whispered. Someone else glanced at me quickly before looking away again. I stayed still, hands folded on the table, no reaction, because something about the whole thing felt wrong. Not the accusations, the timing. 3 weeks earlier, I had submitted a report to senior management. It exposed serious accounting discrepancies tied to a department contract. At the time, Daniel had smiled and said he would look into it. Now, suddenly, I was the problem. Coincidence or something else? I looked at the screen again. The access logs were real, but something about them didn't add up. The timestamps were slightly off, small details most people wouldn't notice, but I worked with those systems every day, and the pattern didn't match my routine. Have you ever recognized your own work being used against you? Daniel closed the folder. "For the protection of the company," he said calmly, "we're terminating your employment effective immediately." Just like that. No investigation, no private meeting, just a quiet execution in front of half the department. A security officer appeared at the door. Not aggressively, just standing there, waiting. I slowly pushed my chair back and stood. The room stayed silent. Not one person spoke. Not one person asked a question. Daniel handed me an envelope. "Your final paperwork," he said. I took it. Still calm, still quiet, because the strangest part of the entire moment wasn't the accusation, it was the expression on Daniel's face. Relief, like a problem had just been removed. But problems rarely disappear that easily, and the moment I stepped out of that conference room, I realized something important. They hadn't just fired me, they had rushed. The hallway outside the conference room felt strangely normal. Phones were ringing, someone down the corridor laughed, a printer hummed somewhere behind the reception desk. It was the kind of ordinary office noise that makes moments like this feel unreal. The security officer walked a few steps behind me as I collected my things. Not close enough to intimidate, just close enough to make sure I didn't wander. My desk looked exactly the way I had left it that morning. Coffee mug, notebook, a small plant that had somehow survived 3 years under fluorescent lights. I packed slowly. No rush, because rushing would have meant panic, and panic was exactly what they expected. Have you ever noticed how people assume silence means defeat? A few coworkers passed by. Some looked uncomfortable, others pretended not to notice. One person gave me a quick sympathetic glance before disappearing into the break room. No one asked questions, but I didn't blame them. Office politics teaches people very quickly which battles are safe and which are dangerous. I slipped my laptop charger into my bag and zipped it shut. Then I picked up the envelope Daniel had handed me. Termination paperwork, company policy summary, and a short paragraph about confidentiality obligations. I almost smiled, because buried in that paperwork was something interesting, a timeline. According to the documents, the investigation had started 4 days ago. 4 days. But I had submitted my accounting report to senior leadership 3 weeks ago, which meant something important. Someone had moved very quickly, too quickly. The security officer finally spoke. Ready? His voice wasn't unfriendly, just procedural. I nodded. Yeah. We walked toward the elevator. The building lobby came into view through the glass walls below, people entering, leaving, checking phones, carrying lunch bags, life moving normally. The elevator doors opened with a quiet chime. Inside, the silence felt heavier. The officer pressed the lobby button. "You've been here a while?" he asked casually. 3 years, I said. He nodded. Tough day. I didn't answer right away, because something else just clicked. 3 years. 3 years of system access. 3 years of internal logs. 3 years of understanding exactly how the company tracked file activity. And suddenly, those red highlights on the presentation screen looked even stranger, because the timestamps Daniel showed everyone didn't match the actual system architecture. Have you ever realized someone made a mistake while trying to frame you? The elevator doors opened. The lobby smelled like polished marble and fresh coffee. The officer walked me to the front desk and signed a form confirming I had returned my access badge. Then he held the door open. "That's everything," he said. I stepped outside. Cold air hit my face. The city noise rushed back all at once. Cars, voices, footsteps. For a moment, I just stood there on the sidewalk, unemployed, accused, publicly humiliated. Exactly the outcome they wanted. But the more I thought about the logs Daniel had shown, the more something felt off, because whoever built that setup overlooked one detail, a small one, but important. They forgot who originally designed the system that recorded those access logs. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I walked 3 blocks to a quiet cafe I used to visit during lunch breaks. The place smelled like espresso and warm bread. A soft jazz playlist hummed through the speakers, while people worked quietly on laptops. No one there knew I had just been fired. No one there knew I had just been accused of something serious enough to end a career. And for a moment, that normality felt strangely comforting. I ordered a coffee and sat near the window. Then I opened my laptop. Not my work laptop, my personal one. Because over the years, I had developed a habit, keeping detailed records of every system update I designed or implemented at the company. Not out of paranoia, just professionalism. When you work in systems architecture, documentation is everything. Have you ever noticed how the smallest technical detail can quietly expose a very big lie? I pulled up my archived notes. 3 years of system logs, security updates, access protocols. And there it was, the logging server configuration I had built during my 2nd year at the company. It tracked every access event, but it also recorded something else, device origin, meaning every login carried a fingerprint of the machine that accessed the file. Daniel had shown timestamps. He had shown my username, but he had skipped one line of data, the device ID. Why? I leaned back slowly, because suddenly the pattern became clear.
someone had copied my credentials or created activity under my account, but they had done it from a machine that didn't belong to me, and that detail would be sitting quietly in the original server logs, waiting. Have you ever realized the truth was already recorded, just ignored? I opened my email. There was one message from the company's legal department reminding me of confidentiality obligations, another from HR confirming termination, and one more message that made me pause, a forwarded email from 3 weeks ago, the accounting report I had submitted, the one Daniel said he would review, except this version had an extra name in the reply chain, Karen Whitfield, head of finance. She hadn't been in the conference room that morning, which was interesting, because the discrepancies I had reported directly affected her department. I closed the laptop slowly. The story was starting to make sense. The rushed investigation, the public accusation, the missing log details. Someone needed the report to disappear, and the fastest way to erase a problem was to erase the person who discovered it. I stared out the cafe window. Traffic rolled past. People crossed the street. Life moving normally, while something much larger was quietly shifting beneath the surface. Because if the server logs still existed, then the truth existed too. And whoever set me up had forgotten something very important. Digital records don't panic. They just wait. I didn't contact anyone from the company that day. Not HR, not Daniel, not even the few coworkers I trusted. Instead, I went home and opened the folder I hadn't touched in 3 years. Inside were backups, design documents, system architecture diagrams, and one thing most people never think about when building internal security systems: audit mirrors. When I created the company's logging infrastructure, I built a secondary archive server that stored encrypted copies of access logs every 12 hours. Not because I expected fraud, but because redundancy is standard practice when you design systems responsible for tracking sensitive activity. Most employees never knew the mirror server existed. Only 2 people had administrative privileges: me and Daniel. Have you ever realized the person accusing you is also the only other person who could manipulate the evidence? I logged into the archive server. The login screen appeared instantly. My credentials still worked, which was interesting, because if I had really been terminated for security violations, my access would have been revoked immediately. Instead, the system opened, clean, quiet, and full of data. I pulled up the logs for the dates Daniel had shown in the conference room. There it was, the same access events, same timestamps, same document transfers. But the archive showed something Daniel had carefully hidden: device IDs. Each login was tagged with the machine used to access the system. My laptop ID appeared exactly where it should: daily reports, system maintenance, normal activity. But the suspicious transfers? Different machine, different location, different network terminal entirely. I stared at the screen for a long moment, because that terminal ID belonged to a computer in the finance department, Karen Whitfield's department. Have you ever watched a live rapport with the full picture appears? I exported the logs, not dramatically, just quietly saved them to an encrypted folder. Then I compared them with the accounting report I had submitted weeks earlier. The discrepancies pointed towards financial manipulation in vendor contracts. If someone inside finance had been redirecting payments, my report would have been a problem. A big problem. Suddenly, Daniel's behavior in the conference room made perfect sense. The rushed accusation, the missing device data, the public firing. They weren't just trying to remove me. They were trying to discredit the person who discovered the problem. I closed the laptop and sat back in my chair. For the first time since that meeting, I wasn't angry. I was calm, because the truth wasn't emotional anymore. It was documented. Numbers, logs, digital fingerprints. Evidence doesn't argue. It just exists. And once the right people saw these records, the story would change very quickly. The next morning, I didn't contact the company. Instead, I contacted someone else, an employment attorney. Her office was small and quiet, tucked between a dental clinic and a travel agency, the kind of place people walk in when something in their life has quietly gone very wrong. She listened without interrupting. No dramatic reactions, no disbelief, just careful attention. When I finished explaining what happened, I slid the printed logs across her desk. She read them slowly. Then she asked one simple question. Did you design the system yourself? I nodded. Yes. She leaned back slightly, tapping the page with her pen. These device IDs, they clearly show the activity didn't originate from your workstation. I didn't say anything, because the answer was already in front of us. Have you ever watched someone realize a story they were told isn't true? She turned another page. Your company accused you publicly? Yes. In a meeting? Yes. And they never showed the device origin data? I shook my head. No. The room went quiet for a moment. Then she gave a small, calm smile. This isn't just termination, she said. This looks like wrongful dismissal and evidence manipulation. The words hung in the air. Not emotional, just precise. She began outlining what would happen next. A formal legal notice, a request for internal server records, and a demand for the full investigation file the company claimed to have conducted. Because if Daniel had altered the presentation logs, the original data would still exist somewhere inside the company system. And once attorneys started requesting those records, someone inside that building was going to feel a very sudden kind of pressure. I left the office with a copy of the legal notice in my bag. For the first time since that meeting, I wasn't the one under investigation anymore.
I didn't send the legal notice immediately. My lawyer advised patience. Let them think the story is over, she said. So for a few days, I stayed quiet. No angry emails, no public posts, no attempts to clear my name, just silence. At first, it felt strange, because when someone publicly destroys your reputation, the instinct is to fight back right away, to explain, to defend yourself. But silence has a different kind of power. Have you ever noticed how quickly people become nervous when the person they attacked refuses to react? 3 days passed, then 4, and something interesting began happening. A former coworker texted me. Nothing dramatic, just a short message. Hey, people are asking questions about what happened. I didn't reply. An hour later, another message arrived. Finance department had some weird meeting today. Still, I stayed quiet. Because the moment legal paperwork enters a situation like this, conversations inside companies change. Managers stop joking. Emails become careful. Meetings suddenly happen behind closed doors. 5 days after the meeting where I was fired, my lawyer finally sent the notice. It wasn't emotional. It was precise. A formal request for the full internal investigation file, original server logs, device authentication records, and all communications related to my termination. When companies receive letters like that, they understand something immediately. Evidence is about to be examined, and evidence is very difficult to hide. 2 days later, something even more interesting happened. A former colleague called me. She sounded nervous. Have you heard what's going on? No, I said calmly. She lowered her voice. Internal audit is here. I didn't say anything, because internal audits only happen when something serious is suspected. They're reviewing finance department accounts, she continued, and Daniel's been in meetings all morning. I looked out the window. The city outside moved the same as always. Traffic, people, normal life continuing. But somewhere inside that office building, the story they had created about me was beginning to collapse, and the people who started it were finally realizing something. The evidence they tried to hide was now being examined by people who knew exactly where to look. 3 weeks later, my lawyer called. Her voice sounded calm, but there was something underneath it. The quiet tone people use when they already know the outcome. They've responded to the legal notice, she said. I sat down at my kitchen table. For a moment, I just looked at the sunlight on the wood surface before answering. And there was a brief pause. The internal audit confirmed irregular financial transfers inside the finance department. Not suspected, not possible, confirmed. She continued. The audit team reviewed the original server logs, including the archive mirror you created. Of course they did. Digital systems are stubborn like that. They remember everything, even when people wish they wouldn't. The device IDs showed the access activity came from a finance terminal, not your workstation. Exactly what I had already seen. But hearing it confirmed officially changed something. Because when lawyers and auditors write those conclusions into formal reports, they become permanent. Daniel has been suspended, she said next. That surprised me slightly. Not because I thought he was innocent, but because people like Daniel usually try very hard to stay far away from consequences. Apparently, this time he hadn't managed it. The company is conducting a wider investigation, she continued. Several financial records are now under review.
I leaned back in my chair. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street. Normal life. Again. But inside that company building, the story had clearly changed. The person they accused was no longer the problem. The accusations themselves were. My lawyer continued explaining what would happen next. The company had offered a settlement discussion. They wanted to resolve the wrongful termination quietly. They also requested a confidentiality agreement, which made sense. Corporations cared deeply about their public image, especially when internal fraud and manipulated evidence become part of the story. I asked her one question. Do they know I have the archive logs? She gave a small laugh. Oh yes, she said, they know. Silence filled the line for a moment. Then she added something else. There's more. Karen Whitfield resigned yesterday. The head of finance, the department that had been flagged in my report weeks before I was fired. Apparently the audit had reached the same conclusion I had. Vendor contracts, redirected payments, small amounts at first, then larger ones. Financial manipulation hidden across multiple transactions. My report had simply been the first piece of evidence pointing toward it, and removing me had probably seemed like the fastest way to bury the problem. Except problems built on lies rarely stay buried. Daniel approved the investigation presentation that accused you, my lawyer said, meaning the altered logs, the missing device data, the rushed meeting. All of it had passed through him. Now those same records were being reviewed by people trained to examine exactly that kind of manipulation. It was quiet for a moment. Then she asked something simple. How are you feeling about all this? I thought about it honestly. Not angry, not triumphant, just calm. Because the strange thing about truth is that it doesn't require revenge. It only requires time. The company eventually finalized the settlement. Wrongful termination, reputational damage, lost wages. The agreement closed the case quietly. No dramatic public statements, no loud apologies, just documentation acknowledging what actually happened. A few former coworkers reached out after everything became clear. Some apologized. Others admitted they had doubted the accusations from the beginning but felt powerless to say anything. Office dynamics can be complicated like that. Fear is a powerful silencer. But I never needed those apologies, because the moment the truth was documented, something important had already been restored. My name, my reputation, my life moving forward. And the people who tried to destroy it, they were now dealing with consequences they never expected. Careers ending, investigations expanding, questions that could no longer be ignored. I sometimes think back to that conference room, the coffee smell, the quiet tension, the moment Daniel stood there presenting those altered logs as if they were facts. At the time, everyone in the room believed the story he told. But stories built on lies have a weakness. Eventually, the real record appears. And when it does, everything changes. If this story made you think about a moment when the truth eventually came out, share your thoughts below. What would you have done in that situation?